Hey, I'm Pascal from Orangepixel and welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about Residual, the last game I released 2021, 2 years ago already. It's crazy, been working on other games since then, but this is the last release. And I talked about this game during development a lot on this channel from week 1 all the way to release. And after that I haven't really mentioned it. There's a story there, there's like a huge story. Residual, probably my biggest game. Probably also the one that took the longest to release, not counting the current game. It had a Kickstarter, successful Kickstarter. It had a publisher sign up to the project. It had voice acting and a lot of stuff happening, and then released on PC and Switch. And then it had a publisher signing out of the project. There's a story there, and I'm going to talk about that story. The good stuff, the bad stuff, development wise, but also business wise. Revenue, I will share some numbers because I know everybody likes numbers, but first we're going to dive into the whole context of those numbers. Residual, the game, the good, the bad, and a little bit of ugly maybe, but we'll keep it nice after the intro. So first let's start talking about the good stuff of the project. I quickly had this project up and running. I think the first week I already had a base of a planet and you could run around, jump around. This was mostly because I was building it on a prototype from a few years ago, a few years before that. So I had things up and running pretty quickly and it looked pretty good. And feedback on various tweets and GIFs and videos I showed around were positive. So those were the good things. I really got into this project pretty quickly, and I did of course document all of that. You can check out the channel, there's a playlist, the making of Residual. You can see the first week and all the plans I had, and then you can see it progress and become a huge project that took a little bit longer than I figured it would. Luckily, at some point I decided to just try and do a Kickstarter, and that was also a success. So that's another good thing happening. It wasn't a lot of money. I was asking for, I think, 8,000 euros, $10,000. That would have covered a couple of months of development so that I could wrap things up neatly and release it. But after that Kickstarter, I had a publisher step in. Apogee Entertainment was getting back as a publisher, was still a bit secret, wasn't announced anywhere yet. They were picking up games here and there, and Residual was one of those games. So we actually now had a publisher helping out with financials, with extra music, with voice acting, with testing, with a lot of extra things that I couldn't do on my own, and that was pretty cool to have. And the final good thing about this project, that the released game as it was, I was really happy with it. It's just a beautiful galaxy full of different variations in planets, temperatures, looks, visuals, shapes, and the pathways through those levels and the interaction with things. Of course, if you play like 10 planets, eventually you will notice all the different or all the same type of things. But just completing one planet took you like 4 hours. I remember if you knew what to do, you could rush or run through it in maybe 2. But there's so much to do and so much to go through that just completing one planet took a lot of hours. I think the game looks beautiful. I would have probably made it look different now because I've been learning a couple of things and changes in my recent games. And I could have done those to Residual, but I could have done a lot to Residual. So let's talk about some of the things that I maybe should have done or could have done, and other bad things that happened. Bad, mildly bad, not terribly bad, just things that could have maybe been improved. Okay, so one of the bad things is this game took too long to develop. I should have, especially the start was very quick. The first couple of weeks I had so much stuff up and running. But then I came to that point that I've been struggling with on some other games as well, not being clear on what I was creating. So at some point the ideas I had written down just ran out, were implemented, were done, and nothing else came. And that can be a problem. That's probably also a bigger problem for solo game developers like me. If you have a team around you, they will come with pitching ideas and other stuff happens, and you'll have meetings and you'll talk about things, and it evolves a lot quicker than if you're doing it alone. Luckily for me, I have a Discord, so every now and then when I'm stuck on new games, I just ask people there, and eventually things start hopefully moving in the right direction again. But on Residual, that didn't really happen as much. So at some point it was just me tweaking and fine-tuning details and little things that didn't need all that attention, to be honest. Now the other thing, I just mentioned it, I set myself this weird goal of having a game without violence, so without weapons and guns and other interactions that require weapons. And my puzzle design skills are terribly or just non-existent. So I struggled with creating interesting levels, interesting gameplay, interesting moments in the game, because if you have no violence, there should be other things there. So interaction and some sort of puzzle type solutions required. It's just lacking, and I know that it's lacking. I know the end product could have been better if I would have more. If I would have been able to add more of those type of variations. So I think that's one of the bad things. I just really at some point struggled with not being allowed to just go in and shoot creatures and aliens and other weird things, and I set myself up for failure on that one. And then we had the Kickstarter. It was successful, but it also was a month of draining my brain and my soul and my energy, because I had to market that Kickstarter, I had to push that Kickstarter, I had to really work to make it a success. And it only became successful in like the last couple of days before the end of the Kickstarter. So it wasn't really just a draining month. You need money coming in, you need that Kickstarter to succeed, but you also need to work on the game. But if you're working on the game, you can't promote the Kickstarter. So you had to promote the Kickstarter, you had to push it, you had to mention it everywhere, you had to point people towards it. And here's a new demo, make sure to check out the Kickstarter for it. And it was very draining. So I didn't really like that part of it. And that's also probably what's holding me back from doing a Kickstarter for my new games, because doing a Kickstarter on your own, having to do all those things and market that Kickstarter instead of your game, it's just a double extra thing that's on your plate, and it can be pretty exhausting. I can tell you that from the first experience. But luckily the Kickstarter was a success, and of course it rolled into getting a publisher for the game. The bad thing of running a Kickstarter turned into a good thing of having a successful Kickstarter and then getting a publisher on board. And for the outside world, that probably turned into a strange thing once the publisher stepped out of it again after release. We'll get into that in a minute. Let's first dive into some of the cool stuff, and a lot of that is a part to having a publisher. Well, the first thing was working with a publisher, which was for me the first time to be actually working not just with a publisher, but also with other people, other creative people, other people coming up with ideas and wanting to add stuff to the game and talking about the game and actually add new things to the game that I on my own wouldn't have been doing. The other thing is having a voice actor, like professional voice acting. At some point I wanted the little sidekick robot that was hovering near the player to get a voice. Of course, I'm Dutch, as you might have been able to tell by now by my accent and my struggle with words every now and then. So I asked the publisher if anybody in their team would be interested in voicing the robot. We would just pick someone with an interesting voice, and then that was that. But they came up with voice actors, like professional voice actors, and fine by me. I wasn't paying the bill for that. I would have settled with just anybody doing it from the publishing team, but this was even cooler. We now had a professional voice actor, and she really went for it and added more text, the things that weren't written down, and we used most of those extra samples in the game in certain ways. So pretty cool to have all that stuff happening. We had a team in India testing the game for I think a whole week or 3-4 days, something like that. They would actually change their schedule to go along with my schedule. So they would be working in the evening and the night, so that they would be awake when I was awake, and they could just ask me stuff and show me stuff. And they pretty much played the game until it was completed and had no more bugs in there. So now we get to the point that I'm gonna try to do this in the nicest, best way possible. No bridges are burned, everything is fine, but certain things didn't work out between Residual, Orangepixel and the publisher. So let's navigate that part of the story in a nice way. Let's go. All right, so the biggest issue, I think, eventually, Residual was the first game that was gonna be released for Apogee as their comeback in game publishing, pretty much. It was the first game, and I think they were not ready yet to release it, or at least a lot of stuff wasn't on tracks just yet. At the time that Residual released, and we had set this date and we planned this date together with the PR company, the publisher and me, we decided on September, after a game show, a game event, it would be published, and we were all agreeing on that. But in hindsight, I think they should have told me they weren't ready for it yet. They couldn't just go for it yet. They just had so many things not ready. And if you look at them now, they have social media up and running a lot better. Of course, during that same time that Residual got made and got ready to be released, they were also working on investment and pulling investment, and that news also broke, I think, just before Residual or a little bit after. Just a lot of stuff happening, and at the exact week that Residual launched, they were all catching their breath from just having hosted a booth on a show, and pretty much I was still doing the game release on my own, or at least it felt like that. The marketing agency probably sent out a lot of emails here and there, but it wasn't the stuff that, I mean, that's what I normally do on my own as well. There was nothing extra being done, and I think that kind of damaged it a little bit. At least for me. We had an Xbox version ready to go. Serious Lion did the porting on that. It was ready. We had it up and running. And I think it was fully through certification at Microsoft, or almost. But the Apogee accounts for Xbox release or Xbox publishing weren't ready at that point. They couldn't get it up and running. They didn't have a tech guy on it, I guess. And the same went for a couple of other things. The PlayStation version, I can remember I had it up and running on the PlayStation developer kit at some point, but I'm not exactly sure I had that up and running. It's been a couple of years, but we were very close, but those accounts weren't ready either. So eventually Microsoft changed the whole support for their SDKs and APIs, and our mono game build wouldn't run anymore. So that's why it's not been released since. But we had it up and running, and we could have released it around the same time as the PC and Switch version, but it just didn't happen. And tiny little things like that were sucking out the energy for me to keep continuing work on the game and pushing the game, because it just felt like the game's done. They're now moving on to the next game, or focusing on the next game, and they have these investors now, and they're gonna be searching for bigger titles and all that stuff. And Residual just pretty much was dropped into the marketplace, and let's move on. And that's kind of, it was a little bit, and yeah, it hurt. And yeah, that was very difficult for me. And of course, I had a lot of plans for Residual 2.0. Like, you could get off the planet in this version, but then I wanted you to be able to travel to other planets from there on, and maybe hop from planet to planet. I had a lot of ideas, and I shared them on my Discord as well, and I was talking about it. But due to all these things happening to the game's release, and it just sitting there, yeah, it really sucked all the energy out of me to continue pushing the game. I figure at some point I'm going to create like a Residual 2 or a sequel in another wording or whatever. And it's going to have these features, because I think those features were still good, but they just didn't end up being pushed as an update to this game, sadly. And I know how hard it is to release games, and that sometimes a game just doesn't do very well, but with the right push and also the marketing behind it I was expecting more creativity in the marketing, especially since it was Apogee who then invented shareware and all the other things. I figured there would be more creativity in the marketing, and that's what you need for certain indie games. You can't just push out press releases and send streamers some information and hope that they pick it up and that it becomes a big game. You need something creative. You need to come up with something that nobody else is thinking of, and I was kind of hoping that would happen. We also talked about big box releases and all those things. Never happened. A lot of stuff was talked about, and I think that's just the difference between me being Dutch and them being American. It's the over-promising and the think big from the Americans, and the realistic side of the Dutch that maybe clashed here and there, and high hopes were just pretty much vaporized, and all sad history of the game, sad history on the publisher. But yeah, eventually they gave back all the publishing rights to me. They didn't have to do that. That's a pretty cool thing to do. So I got the game back in control. I got control of all the publishing on all the platforms. That also meant I could now push an iOS and an Android version, which didn't do a lot. I never expected a lot because I was also pretty much done with the game, but I figured let's push it to those platforms as well. And we pushed it to the Atari VCS afterwards. And long story, let's just now drop in some numbers, because I know that's what you came for probably, and you've been probably skipping a lot of this. So let's talk about some numbers with some extra context. All right, so the numbers, and I have a list for that, and I'll put it on the screen somewhere left, right, I think this side probably. First thing, we had a Kickstarter, which is 8,400 euros, which is about $10,000, maybe a little bit above, which was good, meant a couple of months extra work for me. We then had the PC version going live first, I think, or maybe together with Switch, not sure. PC version 8K after Steam taxes, Switch sales 14K. I think this is all euros, or Steam is probably dollars, but give or take. Eventually the iOS version did 4,600, the Android version did 1,500, and the VCS version did also 1,500 apparently, which is interesting if you're doing games and want to explore the Atari VCS. So in total, almost 30,000, 30K, which is, compared to some of my other games I've been mentioning on the channel in recent weeks, not a lot, not huge amount. Of course, we still had the Kickstarter on top of that. And I had publisher funding development. So that was pretty much a lot of money coming my way to just pay for the work that goes into the game development every month, which was substantial. I can't go into specifics, or I can probably now that the contract is, but I'm not going to go into specifics, but I can tell you that it's pretty easily a year's worth of the game development for me. So regular people of the channel can do a ballpark figure on that one. All in all, for me, Residual was a success. It just had a lot of things that made it feel like a weird success, or a success with a weird taste, like pretty much like a great dinner, a great dessert, but something was not right. There was some ingredient in there that just wasn't really. You get my point. So on Steam, I think it could have done a lot better. This is, I think, the downside of doing a Kickstarter. We had hundreds of Kickstarter backers getting the PC version, which meant they got a free Steam key, which also meant their review doesn't count in the review total. So we didn't get to 10 reviews, which is where the algorithm starts kicking in, or 20 or 30 reviews, because a lot of the reviews were from Kickstarter backers. They just didn't count in those numbers. Pretty much the downside of doing a Kickstarter, and another reason why I'm not very eager to do another one, because you're pretty much losing a lot of push on that first release on Steam. And also, all this revenue was mine. It wasn't shared with the publisher, for the simple reason that I was working on the game for a couple of years, or 1.5 years, and I did a Kickstarter and all that stuff before they stepped in. And as every publisher, they will always mention they want to recoup their investment. And I said, I want to recoup my investment as well. How about the first 20K is mine as a recoup for all the time and the stuff I put into this game already before you stepped into it. And then after that, the rest is gonna be recouped for both of us, or revenue share for like 80 for you, 20% for me until you recoup, and then 50-50. They kind of agreed on that. Yeah, they agreed on that. So pretty much, when the game launched and it didn't do very well, it got to that point of 20K, and all of that was mine pretty much, because that was my recoup of the investment. I wanted this because I know that all my games, or pretty much all my games, on the first couple of months of selling on any store, that 20K is pretty close to what they get. So either if it's an iOS, Android, PC, Switch release and combined on all those platforms, I get to that 20K on my own as well. And I figured that in the worst case situation, the publisher wasn't able to do extra stuff on the marketing or the PR, and in hindsight they weren't. I would still be earning the money I would earn on any game release. And that was about 20k. And I can tell you that I was pretty close to that as well. I think it was at 19k a couple of months after release. And then we just handled all the stuff that I got all the publishing rights back. Knowing what could be done on my own and knowing what was needed to push beyond that. And if they couldn't push beyond those 20k revenue in the first couple of release months, then there was something going wrong. And apparently, yeah, sorry to say it, but I think I was right. There was something going wrong on their marketing push. They didn't reach out. They just didn't reach more people than I would have reached on my own. And I think they're doing a lot better now, so no bad words about them. I even offered them Gauntlet of Power, but they haven't returned my email. We could have been working together on a couple of games by now, and I would have released multiple games for them. But sadly, this is how it all ended. So this is how I'm gonna end the video, because my throat is giving out more and more. And my wife has been sick all week, and I feel like it's starting to hit me as well. So I think those were all the numbers, all the facts, all the details, all the history of Residual. If you have any questions, drop them on the comments below or come say hi on the Discord. Like, subscribe, and I see you in next week's video, I hope. If there's no video, it's because I'm probably a little bit sick. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye.